Hi, my name is Grace Barber Plenty. I'm a film programmer and friend of Tape Collective, and I'm really excited to be joined by some of the filmmakers who are part of the Snapshot season. With me, I've got Ayoka Shinzira, Ngozi Nwora, Warda Mohammed, and Yiro Temibio. I'm just going to go around each of you one by one, and if you want to give me a sentence about your film that's in Snapshot season. Ayoka, I'll start with you.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. My story, it's a feature-length film called Alma's Rainbow. It's the story of a mother-daughter relationship, and both of them are having their own coming-of-age journeys.
I hate being a woman. You ain't no woman yet, Rainbow. What you're feeling now is the easy part.
And Ngozi, we'll go to you next.
Hi, thanks for having me too. My film is a short called Flight of the Swan. It was based on the story of my brother at the time when we were growing up. He got really into ballet and he was actually very good at it. And so he was going to audition for the Royal Ballet School. And that didn't work out. They said he would be more suited to contemporary dance, which is code for he's too black for classical ballet.
Great. And Yero, we'll go to you next.
Hello, I am the director of Essex Girls. It is a short coming of age film set in Essex, a small town in England, about a young woman who's basically trying to carve a place for herself in the world when she doesn't fit into both of her friendship groups that are extremely different from one another.
Mum, didn't you hear me knock? You're supposed to wait for a response.
And Warda.
Thank you for having me. Muna is about a British Somali teen who is navigating a confusing mourning period through a family member she's never met before. And she's on the periphery of her family and her friends, and she's trying to find out who she really is.
I need you to clean the whole house. And when I get home, help me with the cooking.
And what about Abdi?
Skadaf Abdi. Football practice وليه.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you, for including your films in the season and for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you all. As this is a season focusing on Black girlhood on screen, I wanted to start with quite a broad question. I think this season illustrates really clearly that Black girlhood isn't something that's homogenous. It's not the same across the world. There are films from various countries and cultures in this season. What sort of springs to mind to all of you when you think about Black girlhood on screen?
Do we ever see it very
Yeah,
much?
I'm gonna say far and few.
So that would be, I mean, I think things are changing and I'm going to a lot of festivals at the moment and there are quite a lot of different and it's a real range. But I would say for me coming up, there was so few. That was the thing. There were just so few images of Black girlhood on screen, and what Black girlhood you did see on screen was very related to their relationship to Black men on screen. They were always the girlfriends, the sidekicks, the whatever. I'm really struggling to think of films that really centered Black girlhood from when I was coming through filmmaking at the beginning. But I do think you all are starting to really take it and run, you youngsters.
I mean, we have to give you your flowers, you and Oyoka. I think you really kind of started to, put these experiences on the map and inspire younger filmmakers. So, yeah, thank you to you both for kind of blazing the trail.
Well, as Ngozi said, I don't remember seeing a lot of films about Black girlhood within the American context. But I really didn't set out, to address a theme. It really was looking at a story, and then, of course, you build the work, and out of that comes themes. But it did not start there. I was very interested at the time in not only a young girl growing up, but that relationship with the mother that either guides the direction or hinders the growth sometimes. And so the story is not only about the growth of the daughter, but it's also the growth of the mother, is essential to allow the daughter to also blossom.
That's actually something I really noticed as well in Muna. I think it's kind of, that film and Alma's Rainbow, they're almost parallel experiences because I think as a younger person, as a teenager, like Muna is, it's not really something that you think about your parents being the child of someone. And she's kind of also watching her mum go through that sort of like life defining kind of experience of losing a parent.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's um yeah, because it's obviously like when you're growing up, your parents don't really tell you how they really feel. And it's like that it's like After Sun as well. It's a great comparison as well of like um you think you know your parents and then there's another side of them that you don't completely know until you get older and you're like, wow, they're just like me. Um they are all encompassing. They are fully dimensional and they feel things and it's it was interesting to kind of I really wanted to focus it on seeing it through the eyes of a young girl who doesn't really understand everything, but she has strong feelings about her friends and fitting in, and that's what's important to her. But at the same time, she's really finding it difficult to feel like who she stands in her family, but also who she stands in on the bigger aspect of like her family being scattered across the world and what does that mean for her?
I mean, just running with you just mentioned the idea of family being scattered around the world. I think the idea of diaspora is something I see in all of your films, which I think is really amazing. We see representation of the Caribbean diaspora in Alma's Rainbow, obviously the Somali diaspora in Muna, and protagonists of Nigerian heritage in Flight of the Swan and Essex Girls. Why was it important to all of you to kind of show that there's sort of nuances and layers of identity? We're not just seeing like American and British girlhood in these films.
I don't think that it's that it's important. I mean, it is important, but it's just that's who you are. That's who I am. I am diaspora. I mean, I have a Nigerian father. I grew up partly in Nigeria, partly in Britain. And I think as filmmakers, everything comes from who you are. And to understand like some of the complications growing up. So in Flight of the Swan, she's dancing with her chi. Chi is a personal god, a person like your personal ancestor, and that was a story that came from me from Nigeria, and something that my father told me when we left Nigeria, that to make sure that I listened to my chi. And when I was in England, it felt like I was losing contact. I couldn't find her because what I'm saying is it's just part, it wasn't something I set out to do. It's literally part of who I am and the way I relate to stories and want to tell stories. And I also think I think people connect on it so that you go to America and you show your film in America and then they have their own diasporic history or their own, and these are conversations that we have amongst ourselves when we say it. When I saw Essex Girl, I mean, I completely recognized, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the lead character's name, but it so much even then still related to my story from when I was growing up, but then also I recognize so many of the Nigerian elements in her being still a very Essex girl, but a Nigerian Essex girl. This is a thing.
That's so cool, and I love that you said that. For us, so the character's Bisola and the screenwriter and lead actor is Basayo. It was really confusing on set. It was really important for us, I think. You're so right. We are British Nigerian, and it's just ingrained in us as we write. That's the perspective that we're writing from. But we were like, okay, we need to carve a space for coming of age films that look at Black British girlhood. I think there's a lot of scope in the States. I think even for me as a writer director, I pay my council tax bills from my work in America. It just feels as though it's a slight uphill climb when it's like, hey, our stories have nuance. There's a reason why we're not going to write this because it's quite on the nose. Can we have a bit of grace and understanding for this young girl who's also coming of age? And I think as well, our references were um, Girlhood. I love Girlhood as a film, but we were like, why does Celine Sciamma get to tell a story about someone of the West African diaspora? As great as the film is, how can we do that where it feels a bit more authentic to us? And at Sundance, it was amazing to meet some people in their like late 70s who were from like North Carolina, and they were like, oh, so nothing's changed. Because when we were trying to get funding with American places, it was actually quite hard. They were like, Essex, is it like Love Island? Like they didn't understand the nuances of Black Britishness. And then on top of that, a teenage girl, it was like, there was like so much to consider. So I'm glad that someone trying to find a place for themselves in the world does resonate. And it's like, hey, it's not so out there if you have a Black protagonist, if you have a Black writer, if you have a Black director. I think that was affirming for us, uh, which was really cool to experience.
So in terms of my connection with Caribbean communities, I really come um, my understanding and my involvement and my intimate love for, the African diaspora really comes through dance. So I am a child of the arts, music and dance and theater and photography, etc. So for a long time, I studied various African traditions of dance and then Caribbean traditions through the anthropologist Catherine Dunham. So, Catherine Dunham left a tremendous mark on the dance world. Uh, and one of the prominent teachers of the Catherine Dunham technique was a woman named Sevilla Fort, who I did my graduate thesis on. And so my work in film runs parallel with dance. I spent a lot of time as a dancer, a lot of time as a filmmaker. And then my first husband was from Jamaica and we lived in Brooklyn. So it is, I really didn't think about how to infuse the story with these other elements. It was just part of who I am and what I was interested in and what I was connected with. And I didn't realize how perhaps unusual that was until I moved to a place like Atlanta, Georgia, where the Caribbean community is not as upfront and present, or the Nigerian community is not as upfront and present as what you see in a place like New York.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that is true in terms of, I think coming from London, living in Los Angeles, having lived in New York, you kind of forget all the other spaces. So when you're talking about these kind of diaspora populations, I mean, I would say Nigerians tend to get everywhere. I mean, I've been to a lot of places.
This is all over the
Very
world,
true.
all over the world.
Yeah, so but that is I can see that being
But I would say in a place like New York, you find much more, um, it's not unusual to find people who are not Caribbean people eating Jamaican patties, for example, or going to parties and dancing together, or wearing an interest in similar kinds of clothes and colors, because there is also a Southern U.S. connection to the Caribbean and Africa that's very present in like food, and color and certain kinds of object making.
Now, the thing about food is something that I found very wonderful, that wherever you go, and it's not necessarily just black, it can tend to be black or brown, but that food has somehow that need into that Black American, even Black Americans that don't come from the Caribbean or don't have origins in the Caribbean, like Black Americans, the thing to do with food, the things to do with music, the thing to do with dance, there's something quite organic that really links us still, and that's a fascinating thing to try and work out. But that's, when I did my feature film, that was very music based, and that was something that was connected all three. Well, I think of it as a triangle, the diaspora, America, Europe, and Africa. And that was something that very much linked all three spaces, as did a lot to do with, having spice in your food. And that's nice. But then there's a lot of differences too.
Yeah, there's a lot of specificity.
Yeah.
The first time I visited Africa, I went to about 10 different countries, Anglophone and Francophone, and I found the commonality was in dance. So if there were places that I went where I could not speak the local language, if we partied together and danced, that was like having a rhythmic conversation that was just understood by everyone, regardless of where you came from.
Let's stay on the topic of dance because I did want to bring this up. I think we've by fate we've got a really nice group of connections here with your films because Alma's Rainbow and Flight of the Swan, obviously dancers are really at their center. Plus, there's obviously a really great party dance scene in Essex Girls as well. Maybe doesn't have the happiest ending. Yeah, I'm just interested if you all want to tell me about your choices to, include dance in your films and also on a practical level, like how easy is it to, portray a dance scene on film?
The dance scene, party scene in Essex Girls was such a nightmare to film. Um, it was really, really crucial for Bisola as a character to kind of feel slightly uncomfortable in her body and in her blackness in the moment of that feeling of everybody knowing a song and she doesn't know the song. And we called it praise and worship in how she danced. Like it was very reserved and insular. And I think having that visual, it really showed what was going on in her mind. And it was really funny. My editor, who's incredible, Galina, she just looking at Bisayas' face as an actor, as just a stunning person, it's something she kept saying when we were in the edit, and she would say, I don't buy that this person is not feeling that she's beautiful, not feeling that she's loved, or not feeling that she is desirable. And I had to keep explaining to her that unfortunately society's told her all of those things. And in this moment, in this dance, where she's with all of these people who know what they're doing, they know how to use their bodies, they are inherently, have rhythm, according to our main character, it was such like a revelation that we could just have all these emotions and themes just in one scene.
With Flight of the Swan, what was really interesting for me was this kind of juxtaposition of what dance can often mean in Western European cultures and how dance is positioned in African cultures. Like when you've got this sort of complete formality and unnaturalness almost of ballet. Kind of you're doing things with your body that you're not really meant to do with your body. You're not meant to walk around and twiddle on your toes and all this kind of stuff, right? So you're not meant to do that, which is part of the reason why I switched the main character from male to female in the story, was because that female body in ballet, it is the most contorted of them all, and the body form for ballet, the ideal body form for ballet is this kind of very thin, very long, very the difference between the two things. Whereas in like the person that we got to do the choreography in Flight of the Song was a woman called Wumi, who used to be the dancer and choreographer for a band called Soul to Soul. So she was very good at she's Nigerian, obviously, and she had this feeling that she was explaining that when she'd moved from Nigeria to Europe, dance was such a part of life in Nigeria, and when she got to Europe, it was almost like you had designated times and you had to have permission to dance. There was a place for dance and a time, and whereas in Nigeria, dance was much more part of life. And then there's also there's a very spiritual aspect to dance in Nigeria, where it is a way of communicating with the ancestors as well. And dance in Nigeria is very flat-footed because you're pounding the earth. And by pounding the earth with your feet, you're connecting literally to the ancestor world. Whereas in ballet, you're on your toes. So I was playing with all these kind of things within it. And Wumi was so brilliant, and we filmed it on a very ornate Hackney Empire, very ornate red velvety stage. And it was the most complicated scene to shoot, but as it should be in a film about when you're trying to do all those things as a subtext.
For me, I can't imagine creating a work that does not include dance. Whether it's in my film or whether I'm directing episodic television, I usually find a way to incorporate dance in some way. It's an important part of my story and who I am, but also one of the things I've noticed is that people of African descent carry this rhythm in our bodies that's always present and it bursts out whenever it bursts out. So you don't need music even to inspire it. In let's say if I'm in a walking city like a Chicago or a New York and someone is waiting for the traffic light to change, they're just there in the sidewalk like dancing, like waiting for the light to change. You don't really like need a reason. You just kind of feel it. When I'm making breakfast in the morning, like I feel a rhythm. And that feeling, I feel very connected to things that are much bigger than I am. And so I always find a way to honor that in some way in just about all of my work. I mean, it's just remarkable. A couple of years ago, I took my husband to see the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, and somehow he grew up never having seen a dance concert, which I just couldn't believe that there's people who've never seen a dance concert, but in fact, it is true. And he cried. He had no idea that to move the body in particular ways could bring you such joy and also have you fall to your knees weeping. It's just extraordinary. And as I said, I can't imagine doing a work that doesn't incorporate some movement in some way.
And kind of conversely, I think music is kind of the medium that's really used in Muna. Did you always know that music was going to be her passion?
Yeah, 100%. Even in the first draft, I really wanted to have a device that was transcendent and like could go like across the sea. And I think something that connects people is music, and and across generations. So I think that was something I really wanted to use to help Mona connect to her grandfather in a different way.
And I wanted to ask you about the song that we obviously hear and see at the end of the film. How did you find that song? Was it written for the film? Was it a pre-existing piece of music?
It's a pre-existing piece of music. It's an old Somali song, and it was pretty beautiful to make. We shot that scene with the man playing the guitar, the grand who plays the grandfather, and that was shot back home in Somalia. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna mute that. And yeah, we ended up shooting it through like via WhatsApp, which was like pretty very diaspora. Um, and yeah, so it was yeah, we shot that back home because I couldn't find anyone that was of age to play the grandfather here. So I had to use my family network, and my uncle from my mother's side found someone in a day that plays the Somali oud. And yeah, we shot that instantly, and yeah, it was pretty beautiful. He played like three different tracks. Um, and yeah, it was a pretty beautiful experience because it just made the film come to life before we had even shot the film.
Sorry, what do you mean you shot it through WhatsApp?
So, well, I didn't shoot it directly through WhatsApp, but I directed it through WhatsApp. It was it was recorded on two different phones. Like one was recording it landscape and the other person was recording it portrait. And my uncle was like video calling us through WhatsApp going, "How's the lighting here? Do you like this? Do you want this? Do you want that?" So like my uncle was my co-director. And he was
And
like
did
the
the
gaffer. He was
footage
holding the
end up
light.
and did visual footage from that end up in the film, or was it just the sound or visual
No,
footage?
the visual. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a scene where her brother, Muna's brother, sends her a video because she's like, "How do I mourn a family member I've never met before? I just I don't get it." And it's towards the end of the film, and her brother sends her the video, and she really has this like connection to the song and to him playing the guitar. So yeah, that's recorded on her phone. She sees it on the
Brilliant.
phone.
Such a gorgeous scene. It's really, really lovely. I'm going to continue with things that you all have in common. It's been so interesting, kind of like going through all of your histories and your careers and noticing things that you all have in common. Obviously, Yero Warder, you're here with short films, and Ngozi, you are as well. But Ayoka and Ngozi, you've also had such extensive careers in shorts and features. I guess I wanted to ask all of you what you think about kind of short films as a medium for, Black women directors and for portraying Black girlhood, because I feel like we're really seeing a lot of films at the moment, as we kind of talked about earlier, that are really like focusing on that.
I think short films are are really, I think they're really fundamental and they're really brilliant and they can really do a great job. And they're obviously easier to make than not easy because nothing's easy, but they're less complicated to make than a feature film. Like they're more achievable. And they can give you a chance to tell stories um, in a bite-sized form that can get out there. The danger is that, especially for Black filmmakers and especially for Black women filmmakers, as that becomes a circle you get stuck in, like to actually use it to break out to that you still can get to a point where people are willing to you can make a short story happen and people are willing to give you a chances on short stories. But when it comes to TV series or feature films, it becomes much harder. It's much harder for everybody, not just Black women, but it's harder for Black women. And then also the accessibility of seeing the work it's very, I mean, it's much better now than it was in the past. But it's still very festival orientated. Once you put it on YouTube, obviously you've killed all possibilities of making what little money you can from short films because you're not going to make money from short films. But you don't want to be doing it becomes a bit of a ghetto if everything you make just has to end up on YouTube. So, you have this festival circuit, which is great, but it's the same type of people going to festivals. And for a lot of us who make films that I would say have a diaspora element, also getting it to the countries that you want, to get them to Africa is a very labor-intensive job. But I do love short films because if they're bad as well, they're over soon. And if they're good, you're really inspired. So it's great.
I have a slightly different take, and it's based on admittedly it's based on my own personal history. So I think short films are really difficult to make. I think a really good short film is very hard to make because it requires you have very little breathing space. And so you really have to know how to use the space wisely. I almost want to say poetically. There's a kind of luxury that you don't have in short films, that can also make those things that don't work more visible, than in a feature film where you have more time. So I'm really, I love seeing short films, and how directors, how they play with space and time, because it's very different. Um, I think the reality is that most people making films are not making a lot of money. And so one has to be very clear, if you're going to engage in this, this endeavor, why it is that you want to be in this particular visual space, because there's other visual spaces you can go to. So what really draws you there and what really keeps you there? If it's for the money, then you need to sort of rethink what you're doing so that you're aligned with, the money makers, the money givers, the money distributors, etc. I think it's really important to know why you are doing what it is that you're doing, whether it's film or whatever, whether it's short, feature, episodic, whatever. So the reason I said I'm answering this as it relates to my own history is I never thought about, filmmaking and making money. And if I did, I probably would not have made as many films as I have. It was really something intrinsic in me that I wanted to do in terms of storytelling in a visual medium. And what I've seen, I'm old enough, I'm seasoned enough to have seen sort of what a life cycle looks like. So I have a body of work that was recently, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, rediscovered. And a lot has been written about the work that wasn't written back then. And I said, now I realize what's happening. We had to wait for a new generation to be born. We had to wait for a new generation of film critics, of scholars, of academics, and a new audience to be born who could put the work in context in a way that the previous keepers of the gate, if you will, could not value and put the work in context. So I think it's actually a really interesting time for, Black women making films, because there's a different kind of support system in place that cares about your work in a very different way. And to me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, no, I think for me, I love shorts. And as a short filmmaker, like I'm in the process of I'm like developing a feature and I hope to make a feature in the future. But as a short filmmaker right now, I think I think it's 100% important to make shorts. Obviously, especially in the UK, it's very difficult because of the funding bodies. They're very small. Yara's nodding. It's so super, super tiny. And I think if you're talking about like seeing Black women tell Black stories, I think in the short space it's much bigger, but I think when you want to take that step up into making long form, it's so small, that it's incredibly difficult that we're all using shorts to hone in our craft, but we're also honing in our ways of telling stories, but also telling the people above that we're equipped and that we're ready and that these stories are important. And that's why short films go hand in hand with festivals. Is like people seeing that other festivals care about your work and care about the story you're telling. Tell the people who have the money that, oh, this person's voice is worthy. So yeah, it's kind of like a very vicious like cycle. But yeah, I think shorts are incredibly important. I think taking a jump, going straight into long form is a tricky step, especially because there's ways of like showcasing who you are and like the stories you want to tell. And I think I agree with you about like proof of concepts don't always work, Because what you end up doing is that you're like, I don't want to tell everything about the story in the short, so I'm going to hold back and leave it for my feature, which hasn't even been made yet. So I think it's like making sure you give your all to the short and then making that feature afterwards, because it can make the story seem just like half unsaid, and it's really important just to tell the story you want to tell. And like you said, like some stories are made for short form. I think it's a medium that's like sometimes a little bit disrespected, and especially for Muna, I got asked a lot like, are you going to make it into a long form? And I was like, no. I think it ends there. There's no need to go any further than that. So yeah, I think shorts are incredibly important.
And just to echo you, Border, like I love shorts, especially as someone that I used to work in development. I used to work at BBC Film, and I was like the first port of call for people sending submissions, and we'd get a lot of shorts in, and I loved watching them, and I loved noting like this person needs funding for a feature, like this person has a vision and it's super low budget, but they have a voice. And um one of my very first shorts was like 4 minutes long. It was for Channel 4 and Random Acts. It was an animation. The budget was 3,000. I paid my animator 2,000. It was a scheme for 16 to 24-year-olds. You can imagine I did not have much money. I used my mum as a voice artist and also my production assistant. I just she's like, you never paid me. But that short film that was 4 minutes literally changed my life. It meant that that was broadcast on TV. It meant like I won like a BFI New Talent Award, and they gave me £750 to do whatever I wanted with. So I used that for festivals, because nobody tells you once you made the film you have to pay for the festivals when you're a new filmmaker. And then it meant that I had like an exec who just took a chance on me at BFI, and she was just like, hey, you've made this 4 minute film that packs a punch. The next thing that you do, can I swear? Is it okay to swear?
I think that's why.
Okay, good. If there's anyone under 15, sorry. She was like, the next thing that you do cannot be shit. That's one of the first things a black exec said to me. And it meant that I was funded for another film. And I think it's so different over here in the UK. I haven't ever made a short without public funding. I feel so fortunate to be able to say that, because I know the competition is, I don't even, yeah.
I got into episodic TV quite early on, and it was at the BBC, and it was especially the first one I did. It was a very interesting experience, in as much as I'd come out of independent filmmaking and short films and this very collaborative space. Because the thing about when you're working on a short film with very little money, everybody's doing it because they want to do it, and you've got a lot. It was very collaborative. And I came into the BBC and I was very young. Nobody believed I was being hired. I was a black woman, and therefore I wasn't being hired. And I was very young. I was like 24 at the time. So I wasn't being hired on merit. I was being hired because it was what needed to look like. And then it seeped into me, that feeling. So I remember the first time, somewhere in the sort of day 2 or 3 of the shoot, I became a little bit of an arsehole, because it was like that was what I felt. I had to just, instead of talking to the DP and kind of going, oh, do you think that? Or what do you think? It was like I had to almost just say, put the camera there, because I have the right to tell you to put the camera there, and you do what I tell you, which isn't my way of working. But it felt like, because it was such a male environment, it was almost like I became a bit of a bit macho, like I was sort of being, to just make sure that they understood that, and especially as it was my first time, I actually wanted to talk to people. I wanted to show a bit of like need for information or help, but that wasn't allowed. If that happened, you could feel that you would lose control of the set. So that was my first experience in episodic TV. As a director, it's a very different medium to do in shorts or feature films, in terms of your voice being heard and your voice being distinct.
I think for me, my experience in writing for TV and directing for TV are very different, really. They couldn't be more far apart. I think for me, I feel like TV is a space that is a bit more authored in terms of screenwriting. I think the thing that is a bit tricky and I'm fearful of, because a lot of my peers who are maybe a couple of steps ahead of me have gone through, is that as I continue in TV, it means this thing that this medium I love, but also that gives me financial security. It means it becomes all consuming and I can't work on this feature that I've like been procrastinating on forever. I think there's quite a lot of that in my professional groups and my friendship groups of Black women where they're like, yeah, this is great, it's keeping me afloat, but in terms of like independent filmmaking versus having a couple of million per episode on a TV show as budget, not earning, um, it's really hard. And I've said to myself, like, yes, I'm writing quite a hard TV show at the moment, but I'm like, this summer I have to have like 2 drafts of a feature, or else I'll never do it. And I think a lot of Black women get these episodic jobs, especially stateside, where you go in for like one episode, or you do like just like maybe the last episode of that. And that feels unfair. It just feels like, and that's when you start to begin to think of yourself as a diversity hire. Um, and I think I've always walked onto set and been like, I deserve to be here. In fact, I'm probably more qualified than the person that is a white man the same age as me, because I've worked whatever 15 times as hard. But I remember one of my first times on set on quite a big TV show where I did second unit. This was during the beginning of the pandemic. Um, I walked on to set and this person was like, "Are you in SA?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Do you know what that is? It means an extra." I said, "I know what it means. I'm here because I'm directing today." And she just honestly didn't believe me. It took a senior member of staff from the production company to be like, "Yeah, hey, like your trailer's here." And I remember thinking like that should have been a flex to be like, "Your trailer's here." But it really put me off for the whole day. I was just like, "Oh, this is what it's like now that I've quote unquote made it." And that is something a lot of my peers and I talk about. We're like, okay, every day we go on set, it can actually be quite hard. But there's this thing of like, oh, think of the money, think of the financial freedom. But it's a catch-22 personally.
Across like all jobs, like across occupations, like after the uprising of George Floyd, especially like across the pond as well, there was a lot of hiring going on, and like we see you, we hear you, and obviously that's taken like a different direction now. We're going into the complete opposite, and I think after making I think you're kind of made this promise, especially like you have to make a great piece of work, and once you make a great piece of work, everyone will see that, and then they'll believe in you, and then they'll hire you, and then all your dreams will come true. And it's just like you kind of are humbled very quickly. And I think I've experienced that a lot recently after making Munna, of like I really wanted to. I've been lucky enough, like with working with BBC Film. Obviously, they have this thing, same with like other funding public bodies, where like they don't just make a short; they want to make your feature too. So I've been lucky enough to be developing my feature with BBC Film, and I'm entirely grateful for that. But it's also me trying to still hone in my craft as a filmmaker and as a director, and me wanting to do like episodic television, and that's been really difficult for me at the moment because I will even interview, and the response I always get back is, "We've loved your interview, but you don't have enough experience." I think I always don't put myself. I think the way I was taught growing up by my parents was like, you are Black, you are Muslim, you are a woman, you hone that, you're at the intersection of this is who you are, this is not something you take as a negative. That's how I was taught. But it does kind of start to weigh on you in this industry because it makes you always remind you of what your identity is, especially with the opportunities you get, and especially the opportunities that you're actually even in the room for.
Do you want to work in the medium, and what is it you expect from it?
For me personally, I think it's something, I think a lot of people go from like shorts to features especially debut features, and I really wanted to have that gap in between where I am surrounded by crew as much as possible. I think that I remember telling some that the most inexperienced person on the set is a director, because they don't do much in between that time. So I was like, as somebody that's self-taught, I worked on set at the beginning as a PA. I really love being on set. I love community. I love collaboration. So I really want to be on set just to learn and to grow and to really understand different ways of directing scenes. I think especially not doing your own work, your own word, you have to really expand your mind, and that's something I really want to experience more of. So yeah, and also it is a financial thing as well. I think episodic television keeps you, like you all said, afloat, but it also does deter from the stories you want to tell. So like you said, it's a difficult balance.
Okay, how have your experiences been?
I love episodic television directing because I understand what it is and what it isn't. For the most part, unless you're directing the pilot, you're a guest director. So you're walking into somebody else's vision, but thinking about how to make it your own, how to protect the brand while also figuring out how to make it your own. And what I really enjoyed about it is it's quick, and so it gives you an opportunity to gather, I would say, a lot of information and then figure out how to use it, um, how and when to use it. But I would say too, I think the reason I enjoy it so much is because I come from independent filmmaking, where in independent filmmaking, the kinds of problem solving that you have to do far outweigh oftentimes what you are called to do for episodic television. So I'm very clear that they are not the same. I will tell you my fun story is I did, for the most part, I've had a really good time in episodic television, but I was on a set where they thought of me as the diversity hire. And I think on my second or third day there, I was called into executive producers' offices. And I'm thinking, I've only been here for 3 days. What could I have done wrong already? And they closed the door and they said, how do you know how to do all the things that you're doing? And I really wasn't prepared for the question, and I didn't quite initially understand the question until I understood that they thought that they were checking the diversity hire box. So there wasn't an expectation that I knew how to talk to all the department heads, how I knew, about lighting and camera and choreography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just said to them, they said, where have you been? And I said, I've been standing in front of you for a long time, but you've refused to see me.
So we've got a little bit of time left, and I just wanted to make sure if anyone wants to ask each other questions that we have some space to do that. So do any of you have any questions for each other?
So I do have a question. It's really around money. I'm wondering, I've heard you all mention the BBC and public funds. I'm wondering, as you're thinking about, how you creatively approach your project from a visual storytelling standpoint, are you also looking at thinking about creative ways of funding your visions?
Can I go, Huda? Yeah, it's so interesting. 'Cause I've now been on a couple of panels with some American filmmakers. I did one at Sundance London, And I saw the face of people when I said that I hadn't ever, I've always had like public funding. I feel like our government is just so, sorry to talk about the American government, but it's just so different in terms of the goals in order to fund the arts. I think it's all completely slashed now and it's all changed. But for me growing up, there were always institutions that were like doing the strange films or like the different films. And for example, Random Acts Channel 4, which funded a experimental animation looking at colorism that I wrote when I was working at an animation studio. That for me, I was just like, oh, Channel 4 is the place you go to if you have like a different out of the box sort of idea. And those kind of places where I would go to first. I would never think like, how can I pay for this myself? And I think maybe that is because I got funding for that as a very young person. That was the scheme. Um, it just feels really scary to try and I would not be able to even.
Anything else you want to ask each other?
So am I right in that most of the work is coming from public funds?
Um, do you mean like what, like funding for films? Um, I feel like there's been there's a strange time currently, the amount of WhatsApp groups that I'm in, I don't know about you, Warda, where it's like people are just like, guys, I think it's gonna get better soon. Here's a Screen Daily article about like tax cuts. It feels really dire. Like I did this panel at Children's Festival in Brussels and it was very eye-opening because it's the first time I've had this question on panel, and they were 11 to 13 years old. Uh, the moderator, who asked in Flemish, French, and German, does anyone have any questions? My first question was, so how much money do you make? How much money do you make per month? And that to me, I loved. It was mainly children of West African immigrants living in a really small town just outside Brussels. And I just had a really honest conversation with them. I'm here, saying you can make it, you can do whatever, you can tell stories, use your voice. But it's like, actually, financially, how viable is this? And sadly, the amount of panels that I even do, speaking with other adults, somehow it always veers into how sustainable is the industry, how sustainable is it for Black women, how, etc. So it's really hard. There are like would you say there are three big funders, Grace and Order?
Yeah.
BFI, Film 4, BBC Film. And for me, who used to work at BBC Film, we would get 1,000 submissions a year. So you can imagine if you're only making 12 films a year, the competition's quite features, it's quite hard.
How is the whole sort of crowdfunding thing? Because Essex Girls did do a bit. I saw your Kickstarter. You did
Yeah.
a bit
So
of top.
yeah,
And did you want? How did you both of you get it from completely the budgets from funders, or did you use some sort of crowdfunding? And is crowdfunding becoming a thing in the UK to actually get things done as well?
I feel like it is like Kickstarter was great for us as like a top up.
Okay.
Um, it was a super every person that watches Essex Girls and we tell them the budget, they're like, what? It looks like it was way more. It was a very ambitious film. We shot it in 5 days. And sometimes I rewatch it, I'm like, this feels like a pilot. Like it's super jam-packed, has a lot of extras, and it's this thing of us saying, like, okay, we're not going to make any money from this. We're not paying ourselves. We need to pay every single person that like walks onto the set, from catering to this 20-year-old young actor pretending to be 15 that that lives in Essex. So it's really that was really helpful for us. And they did a really big shout out at Sundance to say here are they celebrated all the films that they actually helped fund, which also helped visibility for us. But that's the first time for me that I've gone through that route of having some additional help that way.
For me, BBC is public funded, so you cannot crowdfund. So you have to go through independent donators, like which those people who came on board that offered a bit of money came on board as an exec producers. So yeah, that's how we did it.
When I was coming up, the
Yeah.
generation before me they were part of the co-ops. Do either of you know what the co-ops? Yeah, it
The
was this.
shop.
What? And it was a wonderful time in terms of, it was I forget who funded them exactly, but there were these
I think
co-op.
that was still BBC and Channel 4, I think.
It was BBC
Yes.
and Channel 4. I don't know if it was I don't know if the BFI or because it was way before the lottery, wasn't it?
Mm.
Anyway, we had this amazing time. I was at college when they were doing, and they came in, and came in and took over a semester and taught us for a semester at film school. And there was just this really vibrant. There was a lot of this work going out. It was really exciting. It was coming through the GLC. A lot of it was coming through the GLC, which is the local council, London Council. But what was bad was that when the GLC got dismantled or went away, the co-ops went away. There wasn't enough. So it's a way somehow having to find a mix between kind of the American go get it, do it yourself kind of system and the British and European more public system, because basically they thrive. The ones that some of them thrived, and some of the directors went on and did some really great things. But the actual core of the workshops went when the GLC went. They weren't self-sufficient by that point, and it's just something to bear in mind in terms of which way. I don't think it's up to us because I do think the arts are getting slashed everywhere, so we're going to have to go the other route. But there is something about being self-sufficient or being able to problem solve in that self-sufficiency way that's quite useful as well.
Yeah, well, like you said about the slashing, like what BFI said when COVID hit, a lot of people were spending time at home. So a lot of people who wanted to write shorts still had the time to write the shorts. So when BFI opened the short film fund again, like 12 many months later, they had like quadruple the amount of submissions that they got.
Yeah.
So they were really overwhelmed because they were like, we've never had this much interest before. And because of the cuts, now BFI Short Film Fund only open once a year. Before it used to be twice a year. So for this country in particular, you have BFI Film for BBC, like we've said, but BFI, you can only apply with one project twice. If you get rejected twice, you cannot apply again. Film 4, you basically got one shot.
So I think this is why I asked about, we're doing this creative work. Are we individually or collectively thinking about creative financing? Because what you're talking about, it's really not much different than it was 40 years ago. And in fact, my first feature film, Alma's Rainbow, the first funding came in through Channel 4. If it's not you who's doing the work, it's somebody else who needs to become a part of your team, who thinks about the creative financial part. Filmmakers are asked to do everything. You write it, you direct it, you produce it, you raise the money, you think about, who can be in it, whose wardrobe can you go in. I mean, there's just so much. And then it's like, okay, and then there's the money part. But really, you're going to, we are all going to the same funding sources. It's like, okay, we haven't had this many proposals. Okay, we'll start a new arm of this. It's the same conversation. So I'm thinking if I would say something to filmmakers who are at the beginning of their career is in the way you think about different department heads, production design, cinematography, etc. There needs to be a department head in charge of your financing because it can't just be either the same studios or the same public funding because your chances of always getting what it is you want or even a small amount, it's very small. It's like professional
Yeah.
sports teams.
Yeah.
It's only a few
Yeah.
people who are going to make, who are going to make the team. Um, and so going back to earlier questions around Black women and girls and filmmaking, it's how do we create systems and environments for us and ask the right questions for us that keep us sane, healthy, and creatively and financially viable so that we're not talking about the same thing 40 years later.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you know, it's a but you know what? I just want to pick up on what you're also saying about there's just the aspect of like us being able to tell our stories. Something I always talk about with people is like having filmmakers that have different stories that they want to tell is super important. But I think what's also goes in tandem with that is people in those positions of powers. Like Yara, you were saying you work at BBC, you worked at BBC Film. Those people that read those submissions or the commissioners and the execs that work there, they're just as important
Yeah.
because they need to be people who are well versed in like understanding different types of stories and be able to understand the stories because we can hand in as many submissions as we want.
Yeah.
But if people can't read what's on the page and they don't get it, they're just like, yeah, I don't get it. It's fine,
Yeah.
whatever, because they can't visually see it.
Yeah.
Because their mind is not that expansive. So have people in those positions of power as like commissioners and executives are super, super important having a diverse range of those people because they're the people who get those stories made.
Yeah. And also, like, lastly, not to sound like this spokesperson for public funding, but just to add to what you're saying, Wada, like, for me, it's beyond the money. It's beyond, having this much for, we only have a small pot, but, you can fundraise elsewhere. It's the fact that you're working with development execs who are the ones taking a chance on you. It's, the person that told me the next thing I do can't be shit. So work really hard at it. I think whether you take the notes of a lot of these execs or not, majority of the time, especially in editorial teams rather than just financiers, like just seeing them as the money people, they are giving notes to help elevate the project or just to support you. And I feel like that's a long-term relationship that you'll have with that person. They might not forever be at BFI, they might not forever be at Film 4. So for me, I think that for me editorially has given me some sort of security where I'm like, okay, there is someone who's maybe asking me questions creatively that I haven't thought about, or is challenging me in a way to improve and be better. Which I feel, having worked stateside too, there are those execs, but also over here it really feels like because these jobs are really far and few, a lot of the time people do stay in these positions for a long time and you build relationships with them.
We are going to have to finish there, I'm afraid. I want to keep listening to all of you talking forever. Like, I've learned so much from all of you, and I'm still just so happy that you can all be in this space. Before we finish, if you want to, you can hold your cards close to your chest. But do you want to tell everyone what you're all sort of working on next or what we can look out for? Ayoka, do you want to go first?
Sure, I am in development for my next feature film.
Amazing. Ngozi?
And I'm attached and well, a bit beyond the development stage, but with a 5-part TV series about the Biafran Civil War drama. Should be fun. And I'm also writing a script about the stolen artifacts. Yeah, which is a feature film.
Amazing. And Yara and Warder, we know that we all need to nag you to get your features done in development. But are you also working on anything else at the moment?
Yes, I'm currently adapting a book for TV. It's set in Brooklyn and Lagos. And yes, I will write that feature this summer, I promise.
Yes.
And Warder, how about you?
Yeah, I'm just developing my feature at the moment.
Actually, Warder, as of today, as of us recording this, do you want to tell everyone what's just happened with Muna?
Yes, Muna's now on BBC iPlayer to watch. Yeah, it's been on a year and a half festival run, so I'm really glad it has a home there now.
Amazing.
Yay.
Aoka and
Where,
Ngozi.
where can you see it in America? Because we don't get iPlayer here anymore. I mean, I'm back in the UK in May, so I'll make a point of watching it then. But is there a way to see it here in America?
VPN.
No, we're trying to figure out where to put it for international viewers. The only American way you can watch it is on American Airlines, and that's it on the plane.
And specifically on American Airlines, not British Airways or
Yeah.
anything. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for joining us and for being part of Snapshot.